Good morning. We're live in Paris and you're listening to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Andrew Mueller. Coming up on the programme, we'll cross to Gstaad, where Monocle's editorial director Tyler Brûlé is standing by. After that, we take a look at the history of the Olympics with an Olympic historian, Philip Barker, and we'll take a look behind the scenes at designing the Olympic Games with the Director of Design for Paris 2024, Joachim Roncin. Later, we'll get travel tips for people who are now planning imminent trips to Paris with the journalist Lindsay Tramuta. Also ahead, we hear from Belize's lone Olympian, Sean Gill, and Monocle's roving Olympics correspondent, Kieran Pender, will be joining us from the action. Kieran, what do you have for us?
It's the penultimate day of the Paris Olympics. The sport of breaking has made its Games debut, athletes are appreciating the free healthcare in the Olympic Village, and we have an update on Games fever in Botswana. All that and more coming up.
More from Kieran later in the show. It's the 10th of August 2024, live from Paris. This is Monocle on Saturday. Good morning, this is Monocle on Saturday. I'm Andrew Mueller, joining you from atop the Sceaux Hotel, aka Maison Allianz in Paris. Allianz, the worldwide insurance partner of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. I'm still joined by Georgina Godwin at Midori House. Georgina, can we have a quick update on what Bella may have been up to in the last 90 seconds or so?
She's been licking my foot. It's really rather sweet, but I'm trying to get her to do it quite quietly because otherwise I think that's not a great sound to have on the radio, really, is it?
We will have more from you and doubtless Bella very shortly, but first we are heading to Gstaad, where Monocle's editorial director is standing by. Tyler, good morning. What is going on in Gstaad this morning?
Good morning from Gstaad, Andrew. The streets are filling up. This is, of course, an alpine village, slightly lower elevation than where St-Moritz is. There's a feeling of course, sport as well. This is, we're in a period right now, the schools will be heading back in Switzerland very shortly. So you already have this sort of sense of summer at an end. Doesn't quite feel like autumn because it's rather toasty here. But that feeling of, the world's getting back into its groove again.
We did talk last week about whether Olympic fever had descended upon Switzerland at all, but are you seeing something of that manifest at the pool in Gstaad?
Well, I think these are the components of it, because, of course, everyone loves what happens on the 3-meter board, the 5-meter board, and one of the fascinating things is there's this amazing pool which is adjacent to the Palace Hotel here, which is really one of the icons of Gstaad. But it's a public pool as well, so it's also open to the community. And I was just sort of watching over the last 2 days, Andrew. Maybe a little bit of it is a reflection of the Olympics, future divers. But here you have this 5-meter concrete tower. There is one Greek lifeguard. He's also in charge of distributing towels and many other things. So he's not really paying too much attention to what's happening on the tower. And you've just got, at times, maybe, sort of 15, 20 kids standing on top. No one's pushing, no one's jostling, but people are jumping down in pairs, fathers and daughters and various friends. But it's a little bit sort of, mayhem sort of, meets chaos up there. And one of the things I was sort of reflecting on, I thought, God, if this was Toronto, if it was London, if it was somewhere in the Anglo world, either it would have been shut down by now, or you would have had to sign all kinds of waivers before sending your kids up, or put them in helmets, or there would need to be some type of harness on as well when they jump over the edge. But here, this was just pure joy, amazing abandonment. And this is what happens when you have a culture which is built around self-responsibility. This is the role of the parents. It's a role of also, if you're of a suitable age, to go off a 5-meter board. But I saw kids who were probably 4 years old going off a 5-meter board. And it's up to you, of course, to ensure that, you're doing it as safely as possible and being mindful of those who are around you.
I mean, is it possible that the Olympics does remind us every 4 years of the value of taking occasional risks? I did have a variation on this conversation earlier this week with a Colombian BMX racer who was not competing in these games, and the cast enveloping a lot of his left arm was the reason for that. But I did ask him, should parents be concerned if their child wishes to take up BMX racing? And he did basically take the view that it does kind of prepare you for life's literal as well as metaphorical knocks.
Absolutely. And I think this is something where the games, and as you said, that whole notion of, life is not without risks. And of course, there might be bigger risks to be had if you're sort of, hurtling over humps at speed on two wheels. Or indeed, if you're deciding to sort of jump off a 5-meter board into a rather sort of, chilly pool in the middle of Switzerland. And I think it's also so important to see that parents as well, are maybe happy to be sitting on the edges, drinking their mojitos. They've got sort of, a casual eye on what's happening, but you don't have that overbearing sense that the municipality, the state, and not to mention, of course, lawyers as well, who are thinking about litigation around this. That actually all of that seems to be a bit of, to the side, and people are just allowed to have a good time.
Moving on a bit, Tyler, people who have already digested this morning's weekend edition will know that I have written a piece lamenting what London doesn't have and which Paris still seems to have in abundance, which is pleasant, welcoming, characterful, and above all, independent places that you can go and get something to drink and something to eat, as opposed to being overrun by generic copy-pasted chains the way that London has. You've seen an example of that still functioning in a smaller town in Switzerland.
Yeah, just around the corner from here, or just down the sort of the country lane, there's the town of Sannen, and it just struck me the other day because I went into the Librairie des Alpages, which is a beautiful little bookstore, independent bookshop, full of just nice titles. Georgina Godwin would absolutely love it. It's a mix of German, French, English, perfectly edited in scale. But then I sort of looked around sort of Sannen in general, and unlike Gstaad is full of all of the major global luxury brands, not to mention the major Swiss grocery store chains, etc. But in Sannen, and this is the point that you were making, Andrew, as well, there's not a chain store in sight. There are none of the major multinational grocery store chains, or certainly any of the domestic chains here in Switzerland. It's all independent operators. The butcher, the baker, not sure about the candlestick maker, but certainly plenty of all of those. And there's just something which happens in terms of the pace and the rhythm of life. And as you sort of said in Paris as well, it's that you can go sort of block after block after block and not be confronted by a logo or a brand name that might be familiar from London or any other major international city.
I mean, is there something that a city of London's size can do to encourage more of that, or does this ultimately come down to consumers choosing to carry on supporting their local independent businesses?
I think it's a combination of that. I think it's also there is legislation around as well. So I come back on one side to, of course, that it needs to be sort of the free hand, and maybe you don't need too much nannying by the state. But I think this is also a very good example of where maybe a little bit of state or municipal intervention as well, which of course will come down to the community, who are there to encourage or maybe discourage, you could also say, chain stores from, of course, coming in, on the major streets.
And finally, Tyler, we will be winding down here to our considerable regret in Paris tomorrow, but Monocle Radio will be broadcasting from elsewhere late next week.
Indeed. We're going to be heading up to back to Emirates. So it's a big part of the team that have been deployed to Paris get to maybe cool down a little bit, Andrew. So we're going to have our Georgina Godwin, Nick Manice, Sophie Grove, of course, all of the required sound engineers and producers and researchers to make this happen. But there's an event called Makers and Shakers up in Emirates, which is going to be running from next weekend. So we'll have a cocktail next Friday and 2 days of broadcasting. So this same program, Monocle on Saturday, also Monocle on Sunday, will be coming from Emirates for the full 2 days. So any of our listeners who are up in the region, it'd be great to see people next weekend.
Tyler, thank you for the moment. We will check back in with you tomorrow. That was Monocle's editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. I can go back to Georgina in London. Georgina, for those of us who are reluctantly packing up the studio and coming back to London today, tomorrow and Monday, what can we look forward to when we get there? Has London been gripped by Olympic fever?
Oh, absolutely. But I'm sad to say that the other thing it's been gripped by is race riots, and just the whole problem around these far-right thugs who've been attacking people. And then there was a huge scare that they were targeting at least 100 places, police deployed everywhere. And instead what you saw was all of these people who were anti-fascists. And honestly, it was a life-affirming moment where the thugs didn't turn up, but the people protecting the migrants turned up, and it was just a really heartwarming feeling. And I think that goes along. It's not entirely divorced from the Olympics. What I'm talking about is this kind of, I don't know, a feel-good moment that's not only here, but also, I'm thinking, in the United States, as we see this incredibly positive campaign coming out from Kamala Harris, and it couldn't be more different from the other side.
I can exclusively reveal, Georgina, that a piece I have written for our Monocle Minute on Monday does touch on a few of these themes as well. It is nice to see an amount of optimism at large, even if, in the case of the United Kingdom and the United States at the moment, it is in reaction to something depressing.
Absolutely, and you just really feel it, and I think part of that is the sort of this wonderful Olympic spirit, and we've all been glued, even those of us that don't like sport, and frankly I'm no fan, but glued to the television, because there is something just amazing about seeing people at the very peak of their condition, of their skill, competing in this way, and with such good sportsmanship largely.
Indeed so. Georgina Godwin, thank you for joining us. You are listening to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Andrew Mueller, and Paris 2024 will shortly be entering the annals of Olympic history, and who better to have an early crack at placing these games in that context than Philip Barker, reporter and Olympic historian. Philip, good morning. Welcome back to Maison Allianz.
Thank you. It's a glorious day, isn't it? I mean, this has really made the Olympics work, the weather, because it's been blue skies pretty much all the way
since the opening ceremony.
When we had a deluge, but when you've got good weather, people are out and about. You go down to the Hotel de Ville, and even those who haven't got tickets are participating. They're queuing. They're wanting to take part in the sport. There was an aerobics routine going on. About 200 people down there, all in front of the Olympic rings and the agitos for the Paralympics. And the atmosphere, the vibe of this place, very akin to what we had in 2012 in London, what has sadly been lost. Very similar to Glasgow for the Commonwealth Games 2014 and Birmingham a couple of years ago for their Commonwealth Games, where people were smiling at one another, having conversations on the metro, talking, what game are you going to, what event are you going to, and everybody I've spoken to has said, this is how the world could and should be.
Yeah, I am myself going for the first time to an actual gold medal event later today. I have tickets for the women's water polo final, Australia versus Spain. I will be going with our Kiwi colleague, David Stevens, who I'm pretty sure right now is trying to buy a Spain shirt and learning all the words to Y Viva España, just in case he needs them. I'm genuinely excited about it, though, and I'm going to go ahead and admit I'm not somebody who's previously paid a great deal of attention to water polo.
Have you got your flag and your green and gold shirt?
Not yet. That's the shopping trip after I finish here. But it is obviously very early to try and think about placing this games in the context of other games. But when you measure Paris against many Olympic Games that you've been to previously, how does it stack up?
Very, very highly indeed. And possibly even last night, some other British colleagues were saying, you know what? This could actually be better than London. This could have eclipsed London. In so many ways, the way that the people in Paris have embraced it now, those who've gone away will think themselves accursed they were not here because this has been such a festival.
That's the first Shakespearean allusion of our stint here. Well done.
Oh, good. I'm glad I've got some. But, you know, Jesse Owens was the great Olympian from 1936, and later on he coined a phrase, it's breaking bread with the world. That's what you do at the Olympics. You're breaking records, you're not breaking heads. And the wonderful thing here, they've thought of so many things. Yes, in an enterprise of this size, things are going to go wrong. Sometimes things don't work. But the transport in Paris, you miss one train, there's another train in 2 minutes. It's wonderful. So it really is working. And they've had some great initiatives here. It's the first gender equal games. And so they have this feature called Where's Alice? You might see it tonight at the water polo. Now, Alice is Alice Milliat, who was a French activist for women's sport in the 1920s when there were very few women's sports. She was a rower. She couldn't take part in the Olympics. There was no athletics in 1924, only fencing, swimming, diving, and tennis. That was about it. And less than 4% of the entire number of competitors in 1924 were women. And she said this is wrong. So she started up a women's Olympiad. And over at Gstaad Pershing, which is still there in the Bois de Vincennes, it's still a sports centre with a track. That's where she had a women's Olympiad in 1922. And the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, the supreme authority, got very vexed because she was using the word Olympiad. And eventually they talked to her. And by 1928, there were women's events in the Olympics for the first time, all down to Alice. Now, Alice is appearing in the stadium. She has her parasol. Looks a bit like Mary Poppins, if I'm honest. And Pierre de Coubertin's been around as well. And the other day I saw him at Stade de Cologne, which is where they had the 1924 games. And I said, "Êtes-vous, Monsieur Coubertin?" "Oui!" And it was a sigh of relief because apparently people have been going up to him and saying, "Êtes-vous Charlie Chaplin?"
But for you personally, and you do have the fancy pass which actually enables you to go and see lots of events. You've been very lucky in that respect.
Yes.
When we think of the sport at these games, I think everyone's agreed that they've been a fabulous occasion and everything has worked splendidly well. But in terms of the sport, what has been your highlights?
Well, seeing Keely Hodgkinson winning a gold medal in the 800 metres, seeing the eventing winning a gold medal, because I'm British and I'm very proud, but also to see Armand Duplantis breaking the world record in the pole vault before our very eyes. And I walk past the Botswanan embassy every day. Now, it was very quiet this morning. I don't think they'd had a party there. But Letsile Tobogo won the 200 metres the other night. And that was the first time that the Botswanan flag, the blue, white and black, had ever been seen at the top of the Olympic masthead for a gold medal. They've been competing since 1980. So what a moment for them. We saw the South Africans celebrating silver in the relay like it was gold. So you see... somebody, I think it was Simon Barnes, one of the great sports writers in Britain, said everything matters to someone, no matter what sport it is. And that's the great thing, that you go on the metro, you find out all these people have been taking part. I was at breaking yesterday and seeing the very first breaking, and it was fantastic. The stadium, well, the arena was full in the Place de la Concorde. The crowds were filing in to see that, skateboarding and 3-on-3 basketball. They were all having a great time. I didn't understand any of the terminology, but the breakdancing was very energetic. They have one girl from Australia, actually. She goes by the sobriquet, because they all have nicknames. Ray Gun.
Yeah, she has become extremely famous in Australia in the last 24 hours. It's I'm going to say a double-edged kind of thing.
Yes, unfortunately on social media she's been criticised because her performance was not perceived by those who know as very good. She looked pretty good to me. But she's doing this research. She's an academic at Macquarie University, and she's researching into the social impacts and the cultural significance of breaking. And clearly this is something that's got the kids engaged because the place was full and they were all responding to the DJ. And guess who we had to do the trois coups, this wonderful thing where it's like in the theatre in France, they have 3 knocks on the floor with his staff to tell all the patrons that the performance is about to begin. So they've had all the great sports stars. Yesterday they had Snoop Dogg.
Inevitably.
Yeah.
Philip Barker, reporter and Olympic historian, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to Monocle on Saturday. You're listening to Monocle on Saturday, live from Paris with me, Andrew Mueller. And let's turn now to Olympic design with the Director of Design for this year's Olympics and Paralympic Games, Joachim Roncin. Welcome back to the show. We did speak to you near the start of the Games. We are now nearing the finish line. We were just asking Philip what he is taking away from these Games. What's going to stick with you?
Well, thanks for having me again. Well, I don't know. I think this feeling of joy will stick with me. I've been listening to the previous guy that was invited, and he said that it was such an incredible crowd, and people were so happy in the street, and everybody was so nice. It's kind of strange because this is not what we used to have in Paris. Everybody's looking like very concerned and annoyed all the time. But now everyone is happy, and even in the metro, everyone is happy. So that's one thing I'll remember forever, I guess, having Paris like this.
It is honestly amazing that every single guest I think we've spoken to who knows Paris well has said exactly that this has just been this strange and wonderful outburst of joy in the life of this city. But for you, obviously, who was intimately involved with how these games were going to look, what's it been for you? What has it been like for you seeing your designs in action, seeing people interact with them, understand them, appreciate them?
You know, we're never used to having or to design a global event. And something like that is maybe once in a lifetime. And of course, when I've been working on this for the past 5 years, never I could have imagined the impact and what we created. We had some ideas, we had some strong feelings about what we should do, especially in the city of Paris, which is already a beautiful decor. So we didn't want to ruin it. We wanted to have it blending in, something very subtle and stuff, and we wanted to bring joy. So, it was kind of, I feel a little bit busy, I guess. The fact that everyone likes it, it's something that is, I guess, a success. So, I'm very, very happy with all of this. And the team and all the team I'm working with, the creative team, we're all so ecstatic about what's happening.
But what do you take away from this as a designer, though? How will your experiences here and what you've learned influence what you do in future, do you think?
We never have enough time. That's the thing I will take up. We started 5 years ago, but we thought like 5 years ago, we have some time. But time is always the biggest challenge because we always have to make there's so many stuff to do. It's huge. There's so many venues. There's so many details we wanted to get right. It's the time issue is something that I will always try to manage a little bit better and diplomacy as well, because there's so many people to convince, so many people to talk to, the IOC, the government, the town hall, and even the executive at the Paris 2024. So there's so many people to convince on one idea, one small idea, one detail, one thing. The pink, for instance, the pink that you can see throughout all the games is something very, very important. And I thought that was something that could be very important for the Paris 2024. So I had to go through all those meetings to convince everyone that the pink was our main color.
And just finally, on the subject of time, do you actually have any now? Do you get to have a bit of a break, or are you already working on the next thing?
Well, I'm a lot talking to the media, as you can see right now. And I'm talking a lot, like I have a meeting in about half an hour with the LA creative team here in Paris. They came here to see what we have done and just to give them some tips and to try to hand out everything we did and try to make all the best for LA 28.
Joachim Roncin, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to Monocle on Saturday. This is Monocle on Saturday, live from Paris. Now, every city which hosts a Games hopes that its Games will be a showcase for the city, even when the city is this city, which needs less introduction than perhaps any other. And these Games were designed to show off their host city like no previous Games have, so a surge in tourist bookings seems a reasonable expectation. But what should those people see when they get here, other than the obvious? Well, joining me now is the culture and travel journalist, Lindsay Tremuta. Lindsay, first of all, a question we've been asking pretty much everybody. Just what have you seen of Paris and how it has embraced these Olympics?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I have to say it's been a dramatic shift only in the last few weeks. I think Paris and its locals, as I'm sure you've discussed on the show before, there was a lot of reluctance there was a lot of resistance. There were a lot of disruptions tied to getting everything up and ready. And I think that created an attitude and a sentiment that was unfortunately very, very negative. But like our English friends who warned us that a similar situation was felt in London in 2012, and then everything changed once the games really began. That's exactly what happened. And so the atmosphere has been electric. It's been very positive. There's a lot of joy, and I think that not only have Parisians needed that, but I think the world needed to see Paris in this light, and not so much the we resist everything, we're always demonstrating, and we're always at odds.
I mean, despite all of that, or perhaps given people's variegated tastes because of it, France is still the most touristed country on earth. Paris is one of the most touristed cities on earth, but if people are listening to us and have been watching the games and think, gosh, I haven't been to Paris, or it's been too long since I went to Paris, what would you suggest they see other than the obvious stuff, which is not to decry the obvious stuff in Paris, because here more than in most cities, the obvious stuff is amazing, but everybody knows it's there. What else should people do?
Well, I think as long as people can get out of the city center, they're already something different. So maybe that's going to the catacombs in the 14th arrondissement. Maybe that's going to Belleville and strolling the neighborhoods and eating, lunch or dinner up there. Maybe it's going to the Butte Chaumont Park. I think it's really trying to get outside of the center, where realistically that's where locals spend their time. And so I think if a traveler wants to sort of get under the surface and experience something different, the benefit of Paris is that there are plenty of ways you can do that. There are museums in almost every arrondissement. So you could go to the far reaches of the 16th arrondissement, or you could go up to a gallery in the 12th arrondissement and explore that. So really it's entirely possible to sort of map out your stay and decide, I'm only going to see this one section of the city. Let's say it's the northeastern part of Paris, and there's plenty to keep you occupied. And I think that should be a more deliberate choice, rather than just say, I'll decide wherever things take me. But the danger in that is that if you're staying in the center or in the sort of main pockets where there are major monuments, then you're not going to necessarily venture out.
There are some cities where there are definite seasonal considerations about when you should visit. Is Paris one of those? Are there times of year which are better or worse to come here than others?
If we're talking about climate, that's all the more unpredictable these days, as you know. But I would say in general, spring is very rocky. I think it's even more volatile weather-wise, and so I think the sweet spot tends to be between September and early November. But June, there are always things happening, so that's the one benefit. I would say the calmer and more, I would say, morose period is in January after the holidays and people have returned to work, and I think there's just generally kind of a slump. But January also sees sort of the return of Design Week, and eventually we get into Fashion Week. So I think if you want to avoid a lot of crowds and still find good deals on, let's say, hotels, you want to potentially avoid periods where you have a lot of influx of business-related travelers for Fashion Week or Design Week, for example. But I'm personally partial to the feeling in Paris in sort of late September and October. I think it's usually the best weather. People are still really happy, and there's plenty to do. So you really can't go wrong.
And happily, that period is coming up. I know I started out asking about the non-obvious places to visit in Paris, but of the obvious places in Paris, which are, lest we forget, still fantastic, do you have a favorite of those?
Absolutely. I'm always talking about the Palais Royal Gardens, which is right in the first arrondissement. It's not far from the Louvre, but it is so peaceful. This garden, is entirely encircled by these covered arcades. There are art galleries and some coffee shops in there, and some very expensive clothing stores. But the gardens themselves are kind of this incredible respite from what just outside of its sort of perimeters is a very bustling city. It's a very, loud city. And so it's this peaceful spot right in the center of town. And I just find it so magnificent in all seasons, even when there are no trees on the leaves on the trees, I should say. There's always a mood there that's quite, it's quite calming. And I always seeing people take their lunch in the little individual gardens, and read by the fountains. I just think it's magic.
Lindsay Tremuta, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to Monocle on Saturday, live from Paris. Now, every athlete at an Olympic Games is also an ambassador for their country. This responsibility is magnified when a given athlete is the entirety of their nation's representation. At the Paris Olympics, 4 countries sent one-person teams: Liechtenstein, Nauru, Somalia, and Belize, represented in the men's 100 metres by Sean Gill. I spoke to Sean outside the Olympic Village in the days before he took to the Stade de France's 100-metre track, and I started by asking him how Belizean Olympic qualification works.
Well, so in our case, we don't necessarily have a qualifying athlete, meaning an athlete that meets exactly the performance standards set by IOC and World Athletics. So because of inclusion, they give every single country a spot. It's called a universality spot, so that every country can be represented at the Olympics. So from that point now, the federation, meaning the Belize Athletics Association, they choose the best athlete at the time. So at this moment, at the point of the selection, it was me, but it could have been anybody else. It's just based on performance. So at the time, I was the best Belizean athlete.
And how big a thing does it become in Belize when you are the entirety of their Olympic team? Is there a lot of fuss made of you in the media?
Yeah, it's actually a big deal. I mean, because, it's only really one person to support. It's only me. So the entire country, there's Belizeans across the globe. So everybody's supporting me from everywhere in the world. So it is a big fanfare.
And does it become a thing, like, do you hear from the Belizean government, do you hear from people in charge wanting to remind you that not only are you representing Belize abroad, you're the only person representing Belize abroad, it's a country that maybe people don't know much about? Are you under a lot of pressure to behave yourself?
Yeah, so that's actually been the reoccurring theme. I've heard from high-ranking officials and even from family and friends, and it is some pressure, and there is the reminder every single day, you're representing your country, don't get into any trouble, you got to keep your diplomatic status.
Twice now you've also carried Belize's flag into the arena at the Olympics. Well, in this case, not into the arena, but onto the river. Is it possible to articulate what that feels like? I imagine it's a pretty special moment for any athlete, but I guess all the more special when there's only one athlete.
Yeah, so it is the second time. It's a special feeling, but let me see if I can describe it, because when we're walking up in Tokyo, so in France it's the boat, but when we're walking up to the point where they address you as the flag bearer, they start giving you your special garments and your flag pole holder. It's like the feeling is slowly coming in, because nothing started yet. But once we get into the point, it's literally marked off, and once you get to the point of where the volunteers is like, okay, now Belize, it's your turn. For some reason, like a crazy feeling of passion and energy and love and appreciation just takes over you. You just become the ultimate, patriot for your country, and it's something that just happens natural, and it's a great feeling to be waving and holding your country's flag.
Afterwards, do you even dare look at social media?
I do. I really do. But guess what? It's so much. It's so much. Like I can't read all the messages. I can't see all the comments. Even videos like going around of people sharing it. Like I can't track how many times I've seen it. It's crazy. It's crazy. But I love the support.
We have to talk about you not just as a Belizean ambassador, but as a Belizean athlete. That is most of the reason you're here. You're competing in the 100 metres. As we talk, I think we're a few days away from your first heat. What is the build-up like as you anticipate running in, I guess, the signature men's athletics event at an Olympic Games?
Well, so the build up for me, I'm actually trying to stay calm because, it's an event, it's sport, you're going to get nervous, I don't want to go into the race kind of like, worrying about all the pressures and being anxious and nervous. So the build up is a little bit more slower. It's a little bit contained. I'm still doing training every single day. I'm trying to keep my mental health, on the right path, and going up against, the guys that I expect I'm going up against, it's always a hard challenge, but we're prepared, we're ready, and most of all, we're going to have fun, and we're out there to compete, show sportsmanship, and the results is the results.
Do you have an idea in your head of what you think is the best you can realistically hope for?
Well, realistically, we would say maybe we make it out a few rounds. We have the prelims, we have round 1, and then I think it goes to the heats. So realistically, if we could, at least survive and move on, that's a theme we use in track and field. Survive the first day and move on. When you get to the second day, we're going to handle the second day on the second day.
This is where I will allow you to show off a bit, but what is your actual best time for the 100 meters?
Yeah, so my actual best time for the 100 meters is 10.56 seconds. It's not the Belizean national record, but it is good enough. I guess you'd say it's about average.
Well, that does prompt the follow-up question, which I'm going to ask on behalf of everybody who'd be doing well to run 100 metres in any time, never mind 10.5 seconds. You did a very good job of explaining what it feels like to carry your national flag into the Olympics. Is there a way you can explain what it actually feels like to be able to run 100 metres in 10.5?
Actually, I really do take pride in being an athlete, a dedicated athlete. To get to this point of running, the 100 meters in 10.5 seconds or even faster for whoever is running faster, it takes a lot of work. It really does take a lot of work. I'm saying years of hard work. So when you start seeing your achievements starting to show up, it's a really good feeling. You take pride in it, and it's your craft. And if you really love what you do, then when you see the results, you could say, okay, I'm happy. At least all the work I've put in, it's showing for something. But it is a good feeling. And I know that everyone looks at us, and this is we also have responsibility, because I know everyone looks at us as athletes and like, man, I don't think I could ever run that fast, and we're over here as athletes thinking, man, how can I run faster? So I do understand it's a responsibility, because they look at us as if we're somehow, I guess, godly or some aura, because we're doing something they could not possibly think of,
Well, just finally then, I will ask you to represent Belize one more time. For listeners who may not have been there but are now curious about it, what would you say is the best reason to visit?
So I would say the best reason to visit Belize definitely is the culture. As soon as you get there, you're going to be immersed in the culture. Great food. You can go to the islands. We have some of the best beaches in the world. Most people that I've spoken with out here in the village that's been to Belize, everybody's been to the islands. So it seems the islands is the reoccurring theme and some people get there, most people get there by plane, but a lot of people also go on the cruise ships, and somehow everybody ends up at the island. So I guess the islands is the magic spot.
That was Sean Gill, the 100-metre sprinter and Belize's lone Olympian at Paris 2024. He finished 6th in the heats in the preliminary rounds of the 100 metres with a time of 11.17. This is Monocle on Saturday, live from Paris with me, Andrew Mueller. And now Monocle's roving Olympics correspondent, Kieran Pender, joins us from the heart of the action. Good morning, Kieran. What have you been able to see and what do you have coming up now?
Good morning, Andrew. And I was just, while I was listening in on that, pondering when you're moving to Belize to make a bid to be the second Belizean athlete at the next Olympics. Yesterday, I'm sort of losing track of the days. I'm off to the water polo today. I've momentarily lost track of what I was doing yesterday because it's all been such a blur. But the women's water polo final today promises to be a cracker. Australia versus Spain. Australia.
I am going to that myself, Kieran, and I am worse still bringing along a New Zealander who will be cheering for Spain.
Oh, well, I hope to see you there. And then there's also a cracker in the men's water polo final, Croatia-Serbia, an Eastern European derby, and the Australian team in the women's, a really historic story. They added women's water polo to the 2000 Sydney Olympics, and Australia won in the final second against the US. Haven't been back to the gold medal match since. I was at the semi-final when Australia beat the US on penalties. So that shapes up to be an excellent match ahead.
Kieran, I understand that for some American athletes, the Olympic Village has been a bit of a boon for them in terms of the fact that, unlike at home, they can actually access free healthcare.
Yeah, one of the amusing stories of these games, of course, you expect that at the Olympic Village, there's all sorts of freebies for the athletes. They can get their hair cut, they can get a manicure, they get all these free sort of trinkets and their clothing, etc. But a US Rugby Sevens player has been taken to social media to use their presence in the village as a sort of an advocacy point around the US's failing healthcare system, because in the socialist paradise that is the Olympic Village in Paris, you can have all your medical needs catered for. So this Rugby Sevens player was mentioning the fact that she'd got her eyes checked, got some glasses, she had her teeth checked, she'd even had a pap smear. So amazingly, you get comprehensive health cover in the Olympic Village.
We should also talk about those sports where there aren't necessarily straight up and down objective measures of success. There's always, I think, an amount of grousing about the way that some sports are judged, and that has been a thing again, hasn't it?
It has. Obviously, any sporting event where you have sort of multiple iterations, where it's not just a one-off race to the line, you've got to develop some sort of formula to determine who gets the gold medal. And that always comes with controversy, but particularly in Paris or indeed in Marseille, in the sailing, different sailing events have had different criteria in that respect, and that's led to some real disappointment. So, for example, in some of the classes, such as in the dinghy laser class, you have a number of rounds, sort of 10 or 12 rounds, and then it's sort of a points based system, and then you can go into the gold, the final, and you may have already won, or in the case of the Australian who did win, they were guaranteed at worst silver and did in fact win gold. But in other disciplines, including the windsurfing, the prior rounds only count for getting you into the final and missing some of the preliminary finals. And so a really heartbreaking tale for a British windsurfer who was dominant the entire event, missed the preliminary finals because she progressed straight to the final and then lost in that final. And she spoke afterwards of her heartbreak of sort of being the best windsurfer for the entire competition, but not getting the gold medal. And she indicated she might retire from the sport as a result.
Kieran, listeners to yesterday's Monocle Daily will have heard us talking to one of the people responsible for getting breaking up to the gates as an Olympic sport, making its debut here at Paris 2024. I do know that Australia's contribution to this has occasioned an amount of merriment among our fellow citizens back home, but more seriously, the opportunity was taken for an Afghan competitor to make a statement.
Yeah, so in one of the first breaking rounds, there was an Afghan woman competing under the IOC refugee team, and halfway through her breaking performance, ripped off her top to reveal a political message saying free Afghan women, a really important contribution, particularly because the IOC rules preclude such political statements. So it was a very bold and brave, courageous thing for her to do. Breaking made its debut yesterday, has garnered considerable attention, including in relation to the performance of the Australian competitor. Interestingly, Los Angeles 2028, even before these games, had already said they didn't plan to have breaking on the agenda. They're going for baseball and cricket and flag football instead. And so the question is whether it will return in Brisbane in 2032, or whether this is a case of one and done.
And just finally, it was something that our listeners will have heard Philip Barker alluding to earlier, but I think we should join in just finally in the global congratulations for Botswana.
Yes, I mentioned on the show yesterday, Botswana had won their first ever gold medal and not just any gold medal, one of the marquee events, the 200 metres athletics. Not only was that a cause for much celebration back in Botswana, but such is the Olympic fever following that win that the Botswanan government has actually declared Friday to be a public holiday. So wishing all of our Botswanan listeners a merry day off.
That was Monocle's roving Olympics correspondent, Kieran Pender. Thank you very much for joining us. And that is all for this edition of Monocle on Saturday. A big thanks to Georgina Godwin back in London, and to all our guests today, Tyler Brûlé, Philip Barker, Joachim Roncin, Sean Gill, Lindsay Tramuta and Kieran Pender. Thanks to our team in Paris, producer Laura Kramer and studio manager Christy O'Grady, also to Mariella Bevan back in London. Thanks also to Tom Webb and Carlotta Rebello. Join us tomorrow at the same time for more news from Paris. Monocle on Saturday will be back broadcasting from St. Moritz next week. I'm Andrew Mueller. Until then, enjoy your weekend.